Okay, heads up. This particular batch of horror stories are pretty trigger happy. There's tentacles and gelatinous cubes, so you have been warned. For this first story, the DM wants to run a dark, gritty campaign. This has never caused any horror stories before, right? Let's throw a log under the bus fire. Okay, so I'm a girl and pretty new to D&D. I've only been playing since September last year, and it's not been super regular. Maybe once every 2 to 4 weeks. I recently joined a new campaign with new players, all strangers, and decided to play a different character than what I usually play, a human huntress. I'm traveling with a band of rogues, essentially, and we're in a forest filled with mostly packs of orcs. We're kind of like the Robin Hood and his merry men. Anyway, the DM rubbed me the wrong way from the first session. In-game, everything was fine, but while all the players were getting to know each other, he straight up asked if I was only into women, because I had short hair. I told him no, I like men and women. Not too much later, he said, "So I was on this Tinder date, and things were starting to get really good. I'm making some dark jokes, and she's joking back. It was a good time, but then it must have been that time of the month or something, because suddenly she took everything so seriously. Like, I'm just having a joke, no need to be a total leg beard." Maybe the girl was just hypersensitive, but I was getting a vibe that he probably finds super offensive things funny. And that's fine as long as you know your audience. I have a few dead baby jokes, but I wouldn't tell them around anyone I knew who lost a child. Fast forward 2 sessions, and we find a cave which appears to be empty, and seek shelter. But it turns out that there was a cave behind the cave, and guess what? Orcs. And the orcs start fighting us. Well, except the 2 that start trying to pin me down and have their way with my character. I object at this point. Can't they just attack me 2-on-1? Like, attacking me is cause enough for me to be fighting back and continue the conflict. If it's conflict either way, what's the problem? And at this point, I don't feel very comfortable. But I go and tell the table that I was in an abusive relationship for 2 years, and then had a forceful encounter again by a date 2 months after I left him. So I have mild PTSD, and I don't really want to have that triggered at a table of strangers. But it's not real, and it's not as though the orcs have done anything yet. They're just trying to. You can still fight them off. It's just as bad. One of the other players suggested to the DM that they should do as I say, and just have me fight the orcs. No need to bring forceful abuse in the picture. The DM starts going on about how making everything politically correct ruins storytelling, and tells me if I can't handle it, I can go be hysterical somewhere else. So I hysterically shrug and gather my things, and leave with a curt goodbye to all the other players. The DM messaged me afterwards. "Sorry, I didn't realize it would actually upset you. I run pretty dark, gritty campaigns, which is something I told everyone ahead of time. And I'm sorry if it was too much for you. I tried to make it clear that things would get messed up." Which is basically blaming me for being too sensitive, instead of admitting he thought it was entirely appropriate to force a victim with PTSD to roleplay their trauma. And like, it would have been completely fine if he just revised the way the orcs attacked me once I explained my discomfort. But yeah, I'm not playing with that DM ever again. I don't understand why DMs can't be flexible when literally their job is to be flexible. You need to work with a group of people, and it is very hard to get 2 people to agree on a lot of things, let alone a group of them. If you are expecting to find the perfect group of individuals to match your individual taste, then you are going to be in for a rude awakening when you find out that not everyone is on the same wavelength. This is why session zeros are important to find out what everyone wants from the adventure, and what themes are going to come up. You don't want to waste anyone's time, and you don't want to lose players down the line. Be sure to let me know what you all think about this situation as we move on to the next. OP plays a 10-year-old girl. If you heard enough horror stories, then you know exactly where this is going. Let's throw a 10-year-old log on the fire. I'm still kind of in shock, and I needed to get this written down so that it's out of my system. From what I've seen, there are way more messed up stories on this subreddit, but I had to come out of my lurker shell for this one because it got so incredibly bad. So I've been playing in this group almost every week for half a year. In hindsight, I had different expectations about the game than they did, but I kinda liked the DM and he was helping me learn the game, so I decided to stick around. I should mention right now that we had some history. Not only did we go to high school together, but I had a massive crush on him back then, and tried to ask him out several times. I knew that he wasn't into guys, so it was definitely wrong of me, but we were young, and it's been ages since then. I grew up, he got married, and through a mutual friend on Steam, I ended up getting invited to his D&D game that they played at his house. Seemed fun. I had been wanting to try 5e as I had the books for a while, but no one to play with. My character was a high elf wizard named Apricot. In the DM's world, most elves are named after fruit, and I thought it seemed fun, so I ran with it. All races also have lifespans equal to humans in this world, so I decided to be a prodigious 10-year-old elf. She ended up mostly being the butt of other players' jokes, but it never seemed all that mean-spirited, just some inside jokes about elves in their setting. I played her as a brilliant girl with a naive outlook on life, but infinite cheerfulness to back it up. So far, so good. We started off the campaign with some interesting characters. One player used to be in the military, and his character, Brad, was a human fighter that was some sort of homebrew gunslinger. It may have been Matt Mercer's class, but I'm not super familiar. Another guy was playing as Snowflake, a goth halfling rogue with a tragic past, a character he came up with to make fun of tropes. It was a lot funnier than it sounds, and he played the character kind of well. The DM's wife was also playing as Lillian, a female dwarf paladin with a luxurious beard. She even wore a fake beard to the table a couple of times for fun. Finally, there was the youngest guy at the table, who was the DM's cousin. I never asked, but I think he was about 20 or younger, because the first time he had a beer at the table, he winked at me and said, "Don't tell mummy." He was a bit weird and played the zaniest character of the bunch, Marty McFly, the Aarakocra barbarian. He was a parrot man with a feather pattern that perfectly resembled a luchador mask, and he constantly tried to suplex people from the air. We started off at 3rd level, and things went smoothly for the first couple of sessions. Our party was surprisingly lucky with dice rolls when it mattered most, and each boss encounter went down like it was nothing. Every now and then, an enemy thug, hirelings, bandits, and the like would almost kill Apricot, but Marty always came in at the right moment with an elbow drop or whatever. We were all having fun. I'd even forgotten about my past embarrassment with the DM, and we only missed a couple of sessions. I was thoroughly enjoying my first 5e campaign, and grew pretty attached to my character after a while. Fast forward to the last adventure I just played with them. We were 7th level and had been wandering through a massive dungeon in search of a dragon's hoard. Standard stuff, and I think it was mostly from a published adventure, but the DM loved making the monsters much stronger than they normally would be. He would take kobolds and goblins and just give them the stats of young dragons at random, which proved to be fun, but also a little silly at times. After a while, I started assuming that every enemy would be strong enough to one-hit KO my wizard, and started playing as cautiously as possible, which seemed to annoy the DM, so much that at one point he decided that Apricot had to walk across the bridge before any other character. Marty said he could fly over it, but he was silenced and I was told to roll. Brad and Lillian said nothing, and Snowflake continued trying to unlock the corpse of a mimic, so I figured I had no choice. This is where things got weird. I roll my d20, and before even being told what I was rolling for, the DM says I fall into a pit below the bridge and get absorbed into a gelatinous cube. I laugh and roll my eyes, saying something like, fine, I've been in tougher situations. But then he started describing what the cube was doing. He explained in very vivid detail about what was happening. Apricot is covered in goo, which begins seeping into her clothing, and soon into her body, but especially into her holes. The goo forces its way into her mouth, deep down her throat, and then to even less appropriate places. As I heard this, I felt the blood drain from my face while I was listening to this, completely dumbfounded. Up until this point, the campaign had some very odd moments, but never anything quite like this, and certainly not to this magnitude. Apricot, being a 10-year-old girl, I didn't even know what to say, and just didn't open my mouth for the rest of that session. As an encounter began for the rest of the party, Marty went about his business trying to chokeslam an earth elemental who had no neck, and Lillian eventually helped Brad climb a rope down into the cube's pit to save Apricot. It was the least comfortable I've felt in my entire life, easily, but it seemed like everyone else just brushed it off. Obviously, I talked to him about it after the session, before going home for the night. He laughed and said, "Oh, now you're against abuse? Come on, man, you were all gross and such for years. Just this little thing triggers you that hard? You see me complaining about you trying to do me for ages?" Again, I didn't know what to say. I was definitely a little bit creepy around him in high school, but that extended to mild flirting, which was admittedly unwarranted and which I should have apologized for, but which never could have been considered abuse. I convinced him to retcon Apricot's forceful encounter with the slime, and figured that would be the end of it. Like it was just some pent-up awkwardness from high school that he needed to let out after a long day at work. The next session was yesterday, and I wish I had been smart enough to not show up. With the rest of the party acting like nothing had happened, the DM quickly mentions that we decided to retcon the gelatinous cube thing, and we move on for a few hours of normal gameplay. Eventually, we make it to the lair of a beholder named Sabbath, whose theme music was just every album Black Sabbath ever produced playing at random in the background. I breathed a sigh of relief at first, because it seemed like we just have our usual zany boss fight for a few hours and then go home. Unfortunately, after a few rounds, Apricot was then struck by a paralysis I-beam. She is also grappled by one of Sabbath's tentacles. I tensed up at the mention of tentacles, but for a while, nothing creepy happened, so I relaxed a bit. Brad managed to fire an exploding bullet right into Sabbath's main eye, turning off his anti-magic field for a while. So he suddenly decided that Apricot, as the only magic user in the party, was his main target. Once again, out of nowhere, and with excruciating detail, the DM decides to describe the attack in an unexpected manner. Sabbath readies his mana-draining eye stalk. For our group, we use spell points and call them mana. And he snakes it up Apricot's robe. I sat there with my eyes wide and teeth clenched as he described it entering her paralyzed body, which I had no chance to save against because apparently this mana-draining, forceful encounter is a lair action. Brad was laughing in a dude gross kind of way. Snowflake was shaking his head and smiling awkwardly, and Marty listened intently to the DM's description of a slimy eye tentacle entering a 10-year-old girl. Lillian, with her stupid dwarf beard on, just stared at me and then smirked like she was in on it, nodding her head along to the beat of Supernod. Before he was done talking, I just stood up and left, suppressing the urge to vomit. I've never felt more betrayed or disgusted, and I still feel attached to Apricot and her place in his world, so it genuinely feels like someone was violated. If not my trust as a player, then the character that I loved so much. All the good memories with our crazy party are going to slowly melt away, and all I'll be left with from my first experience with D&D is this child being taken advantage of. As I was typing this up, I got a text from Snowflake saying that he quit the campaign too, after an argument broke out about me leaving. Whatever the reason for this weirdness was, he accused Lillian of wanting me gone, and it devolved into name-calling. I suppose there's no going back anyway, but it seems like even Marty was okay with all this. Sorry to leave the story on such a heavy note. I'd love to have had a more fun story since our party's antics were actually wonderful for the longest time. But unfortunately, I don't think it's gonna make me smile much to remember anymore. It's so weird. The party's antics just seem so interesting and different, and I'm sure OP enjoyed all those memories he created, but the DM tainted all those memories because they never talked out their high school drama. I just feel really bad about OP not being able to enjoy all those memories. I really wanted to hear more. It just goes to show that you may think that the past is the past, but one should always make sure to work things out in the present, because you never know how that past affected another person. Sure, things might be awkward, but if you don't address the elephant in the room soon, it's eventually going to trample you. What do you all think about the way that the DM handled the situation? What do you think he should have done instead? Moving on to our last story, we have a guy and his elf lady. The cringe is imminent. Let's just put this naked log on the fire. I enjoy playing D&D 5e, but I don't know many players and usually play at events or Adventures League. There was also this guy who used to come to the local store for Adventures League, and he's your negative stereotype for tabletop players. Big dude, neck beard, deodorant optional, etc., etc. He was banned for being less than family friendly. So I go to a local gaming event to play 5e. I walk in, sign up, grab some snacks, and sit at my assigned table, and start creating a character with the DM. 2 dudes and 2 chicks show up a bit after me and start making characters as well. We have some small talk and they all seem like perfectly fine people. 20 minutes before we start, there's 1 spot left, and Mr. Stereotype sits down. We'll call him Matt. Now, I was at the game that got Matt kicked out of the local store, but he doesn't recognize me. Everyone is done with their characters, and we are just waiting for him to make his. He decides to make a monk. Just like his last character. Then he makes the character a female elf. Uh-oh. He's the only one playing a different gender, but that's fine. I've done it once myself. The DM tells us to describe how our characters look, and I kid you not, he says, "I have short blonde hair with piercing green eyes that stare into your soul. My large chest is barely restrained by only a purple yukata that reaches to the middle of my thigh. My uncovered legs go on for days and beg to be warmed by the touch of another." Everyone is just kind of looking at each other and cringing. The DM seems mildly concerned, but plays it off as a joke. We play a bit and end up speaking with the local lord. Matt decides that while we're speaking to the lord, his character is doing some languid stretching that shows off his character's body. He also informs us that his character has no underclothing. The DM closes his eyes and says, "Your stretching has helped the Lord's mood, but more suggestive displays will be taken poorly." We take a break. He leaves the table and the rest of us discuss his special way of playing. The DM says that he's not technically breaking any rules. We play on and do a myriad of D&D style shenanigans, usually with him trying to seduce everything and taking opportunities to describe his character in detail. One of the women at the table ended up leaving very early with her boyfriend, so we were down 2 players. They gave a half-hearted excuse and left. We take a long rest near a river, and this is where he decides to up the ante. His character removes all clothing and bathes in the river with the normal descriptors of her body. The sole remaining female in our group decides to go fishing in the river for food. He then proceeds to describe how his character rounds the bend to see Matt's character. Floating naked in the slow-moving water, legs spread with one hand working furiously around her groin, while the other massages her chest. Upon sight of your character, she gives a slight grin, removes her hand from her groin to motion you forward before sensually licking the hand slick with the juice of her loins. I'm not exaggerating this. This is what a grown man said in public with strangers. The woman says that's absolutely disgusting, and he adopts a voice like he's playing his character. She clarifies that she's not talking in-game and that he is the most disgusting person she's ever had the misfortune of playing with. He gets angry and starts complaining, saying, "You women are never able to take jokes. I was just role-playing." I bring up the fact that he was banned from the local game store for doing the same thing, and then he just loses his mind. "All of you are just a bunch of social justice warriors." The DM tells him to leave, and he refuses because he paid to get into the event. He winds up having to be escorted out by a cop. I really don't know what's going on in his head, Why does he think that this is the best venue for this? There are much better places on the internet for this sort of thing, so why doesn't he just stick to that? I'm actually wondering how many times he's done this, and when will he get the message that it's not appropriate? Why do you think that he keeps doing this? Also, how many times do you think that he's done this sort of thing?